This is Basic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
I'll tell you, working with Forth on the Atari was great until we exceeded the memory capability of the Atari, and then it was a royal pain in the ass. Anybody who thinks there's a distinction between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either.
Hi, I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Larry Reed was a programmer for Childware, where he worked on two educational games for the Atari 8-bit computers, Word Flyer and Debug, both of which were published by Electronic Arts. This interview took place December 6, 2015. Mostly I want to talk about your time at Childware. I understand you did some software development there. But before we get there, I noticed that you were at Xerox and you did stuff for the Alto.
I did.
That's exciting.
It was at the time. I wouldn't go back there. But yeah, it was pretty exciting. In fact, I was working on a thing called a cell design system, which was an integrated circuit layout editor. It was one of the first of its kind. It was designed for use on a personal computer, and you know, given what we have these days, it's kind of hard to think of an Alto as a personal computer, really. But I don't know if you've ever seen one. But
one time at the Living Computer Museum in Seattle. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they're basically. It was a big, huge box, probably about maybe 3 feet by 3 feet by 2 feet, and that was the box. And then there was a big monitor and keyboard on the desk, and they used RKO5 discs, which were 5 megabyte hard discs, and each hard disk was probably about I would guess about 2.5 feet wide and maybe 1.5 inches high, and that was what we used for storage. And my Alto was I had a 256K Alto, which was actually a highly prized item because most of the ones that they had in the office were only 128K.
Wow.
And so everybody was jealous of me. So that's a little history.
Nice. Okay, so how did you end up doing get out of there and end up at Childware doing educational software?
Well, I was at Xerox from the end of 1978 till the middle of 1983. And a friend of mine, Steve Hayes, who was a fellow I met at Xerox down in Southern California at the time, he had moved up to the Bay Area recently to work at Xerox. And then he got involved with Electronic Arts. He was employee number 10 at Electronic Arts. And he and David Maynard had built their EA's first product, a little game called Worms on the Atari 800. And he called me up and said, hey, would you like to do something like this? And he got me in touch with the Childware people. And so I moved up in the middle of 83 and started working for them and doing the game stuff.
So, all right. So what did they put you to work doing?
The first product I worked on was a thing called Word Flyer, and Word Flyer was a little product on the Atari 800, which it was basically you would there were these two towers on either side, and each tower would have 4 words in it, and then out of the sky there'd be all these different words would come flying at you out of the sky, and you would grab a word from the tower and you go match it to one of the words flying out at you. And started out with single letters, went through all the way up to 4-letter words, and then there are variations like at the highest level, the variations, the words would get their letters scrambled, and they would have different colors and things like that. So the idea was basically, we're not teaching kids about the meanings of the words. other than sort of implicitly that the words, any word that came out that you saw in there was a legitimate word, and eventually you had to know the legitimate spelling in order to decode the scramblings. But mostly it wasn't about meanings and things. It was about letter and word recognition and teaching kids that.
Were you converting the games from another platform or developing it fresh for the Atari? Because I know that Childware did many platforms.
Well, WordFlower was originally developed for the Atari 800, and we ported it to the Commodore 64. And I don't know that it ever got ported to any other platforms. I don't think we didn't do any Apple II work at Childware, to my knowledge. It was all Atari 800, 1200, and Commodore 64. So if there were other ports, I don't know about them.
How did you learn to program the Atari? Did you learn for this job, or was there a previous experience with it?
No, this was it. This was my first attempt, and in fact, it was Atari being a 6502. I was learning the assembly language, but we actually programmed everything in Forth. If you're familiar with Forth, you know that it's that it was originally designed as a language, a highly dense threaded language that was designed for small computer systems, and because Forth in all its glory was actually denser than the equivalent assembly language because of the way it was built. And but one of the nice things about it was that it was really, really easy to write assembly code and hook it into Forth. There was a very simple interface, and so that was the motivation for choosing that. So.
How long did it take you?
That project was probably about I don't know, somewhere around 9 months to a year.
Did you get royalties on it, or was it just like an employee deal?
Well, it was more of an employee deal, which kind of sucked in a lot of ways because Childware eventually, we all had stock in Childware, and the theory was we were going to make money off of the Childware stock, but that didn't work out in the long term. So I didn't really get any royalties. I just got paid a regular old salary.
Well, Childware eventually got sold to HES Software, I believe.
That's right. And that was the downfall. To tell you the truth, HES was poorly managed, and I think the motivation, my personal feeling, and you don't have to quote me on this, was that
anything you say is going to be quoted. So,
all right. Then I'll just say that I think the motivations for the merger were questionable, and we'll leave it at that.
Okay. I noticed. Look, it says here at Atari Mania that the sound for that the WordFlyer game was done by Jaron Lanier.
That's true.
Became kind of famous as a composer and VR guy, and did you work with him?
Yeah, at the time we hired him as a contractor, and at the time he worked for us. His goal was to write a sound kernel that we would use to generate and generate sounds that we would use for the WordFlyer game. At the time, he was in very bad health. He had a severe back problem and did most of his work lying down at home. And it was kind of a challenge to get work out of him because of that. But he did eventually get the sound kernel working, and we used it. And that's pretty much the extent to which we worked with him on that.
Did you get a sense of if this program sold well at all?
It sold all right. I wouldn't say that it sold well, but it did get 4-star reviews and a lot of notice. It was pretty well received. None of the stuff that Childware made ever really sold very well, because at the time Atari was making some big mistakes. This is probably, you could probably look this up, but they apparently had done a lot of things that made all the dealers mad, and so it was really hard for them to get in the stores. And the recession, the '82 recession, was still in force, and a lot of people it was just coming out of that, and so nothing on the Atari was selling really well in those days. But we did all right. We sold enough copies to sort of justify the effort, and like I say, it got 4-star reviews, so we were happy with that.
So what was next for you there?
Well, after that, we worked on a little program, a really cool program called Debug. Debug was a game within a game within a game. It was the whole idea of the game is that you are playing a computer game on a computer, and the computer that you're playing it on breaks down. And so you had this little handyman guy who would go into and look at the different parts of the computer, and you'd figure out what was wrong based on the symptoms and go fix it. And eventually you could get the computer working, and you could actually play the game on the virtual computer within the game. And it was really cool. It was all aimed towards the older kids, 8 to 11, I would guess. And it was all about teaching them about the different components of a computer.
Neat.
Yeah. So that one was on the both the Atari 800 and the Commodore 64.
Yeah, I see that both of those games were distributed by Electronic Arts.
Yeah, everything I worked on there was still distributed by EA.
Mm-hmm.
The HES products were done by other people.
So did Childware go to EA? Typically, would Childware go to EA? So we have this idea for a game that happens inside the computer, or did EA come to you and request the work?
As far as I know, all the ideas were our own, and we had some sort of deal with Electronic Arts for publishing. And part of that was because we had, the good relationship I had with Steve and David Maynard. And the other folks who had started the company knew Trip, and so there were a lot of people knew each other. But basically, we had come up with all the ideas and all the designs and everything, and their motivation was basically just to be a publisher at that time.
Mm-hmm. All right, so those are the two Atari games that I know were published by Childware. Were there others? Were there other that were either published or concepts that didn't come to fruition?
Well, there was one that I worked on, which was called Lost Lion, which was teaching kids about binary search techniques. So the idea was you would be trying to find this lost lion. I don't remember what the story behind that was, so you would the way you'd find it is you'd divide the screen into two different parts, and it would tell you where the lion was, and so you'd take that part and divide it again, and eventually you would learn that the binary search technique of dividing it in half and then in half again was the quickest way to get there. And that was sort of the basic theory. We got a fair amount done to that, but it never really was published. And there were a couple other games that I don't remember very well. I know there was one having to do with, I don't know, some kind of underwater game or something like that. I forget exactly. And those are the ones that I remember the most. Don't know what happened to them. I know that we did deal with some HES games, but I wasn't involved in those projects. And the relationship with HES was not all that great and didn't last very long anyway, because they went under probably about maybe less than a year after the merger.
All right. So after you were done with those products, did you work on stuff for other platforms, or were you strictly Atari?
Just the Atari and 64 at that time. And after Childware, I went off to do non-game work for a couple of years and didn't get back into it until the mid-'80s.
Okay. So when you left Childware after the merger fell apart, or
yeah, that was pretty much it.
Yeah, after the HES fell apart. That's what I mean.
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. HES went under, and we were all out of work. So I went off. We all went our own ways. So that was the way it was.
Yeah. What other games did you do when you got back into the gaming business?
Well, the first thing I did in mid-'86 was I took on a contract to do Marble Madness for the Amiga.
Nice.
And yeah, that was a great project. It was the arcade game was a lot of fun, very popular, and the Amiga was the first port to any non-arcade machine. So it had a lot of really interesting technical challenges. It was a lot of fun doing, and the game was well received. Did very well, and I actually got royalties off of that one. So that was probably my most successful game project as an independent contractor.
Nice. What haven't I asked you about your time doing Atari stuff that I should have?
Well, I don't know if there are a whole lot of other things to ask. I'll tell you, working with Forth on the Atari was great until we exceeded the memory capability of the Atari. And then it was a royal pain in the ass. As long as you were able to do everything within memory, it was really quick. You just shove your disks in. It would compile the code, and everything would be cool. But once we started hitting the memory limits, it got really, really, really slow. And at the end of that project, we had probably 12 or 14 disks that needed to be processed of game code, and the process of getting it compiled took about 12 hours. So you'd have to sit there. It wasn't one of those things where you could just let it go. You'd have to sit there and you'd have to shove a disk in, you wait for it to finish, and then and then as you got to the end of it, it would get longer, and the time would get longer and longer, because once it exceeded the memory limits, it was swapping stuff in and off the disk. And finally, the final versions of the product took 12 hours of nothing but sitting there and shoving the disc in and hitting the button, and it was a royal pain in the butt, let me tell you.
Sounds miserable.
It was totally miserable, and I would never do that again. Now, Forth is kind of a neat language in some ways, and it's very primitive in others. It's because it's a symbolic language, so you can do, but it's like really compact, so you can do small stuff really compact. And I mean, if you want me to get into the details of how Forth works, that would be maybe a discussion. I don't know if you want to do that now, but
sure, why not?
Well, basically, Forth is what they call a threaded language, and so in the first place, it's designed so that each the code is actually exists in blocks on disk. So every 1K of disk space is actually a code block, and the Forth has an editor built into it, and you edit directly that 1K of space. So like it's either everything on that is either a space or it's a character, and so you got so your program is all these 1K blocks, and the language itself is it's designed for reverse Polish notation. So you're basically pushing arguments on a stack, and then calling a function that manipulates the arguments on the stack and leaves the result on the stack. So it's very much like one of those old reverse Polish calculators they used to have. And internally, everything is basically a link, a pointer to everything else. And so you have this. You build up a Forth program is essentially a list of pointers that point to other things, and the leaf nodes for all these pointers are little snippets of assembly language, and you have a core set of routines that are built into the Forth runtime, and then you just add to it. And so if you want to write something that's the problem with it is that it's really inefficient because you're following links all the time, and to everything you do is following links. But eventually you get to some assembly language, and so if you come up with some stuff that's like really critical, you can very easily translate it into assembly language. That was one of the nice things about it, and you could just it was really simple to pull. You just pull the arguments off the stack in a very standard way. You do your code and you put your stuff back on the stack, and it was like absurdly simple to do. So it had that advantage. I would guess that like I say, Forth is it's one of those languages that that never really had a long-term future, because there's so much better ways of doing things. But people were quite fanatical about it in the day. And like I say, as long as you were working on a machine that had enough memory for the fourth interpreter and your code, you were fine. It was only when you started doing, exceeding those memory limits that you started running into problems. So it was cool. Pain in the butt, but works well for what it did. If there's some other things about the Atari, I was not an expert on how the sound worked, which is why we ended up hiring Jaron, and the sound stuff was pretty cool. He had some pretty interesting stuff, and so we were getting bird tweets and all sorts of different really cool stuff out of it that worked pretty well. As far as the graphics were concerned, it was. I don't know if you have any familiarity with how graphics worked on those old computers. It was pretty much you were limited in the number of colors and the number of pixels you could use, and the Atari and all those 6502 machines used they used knowledge of how how color pixels work on the display to get different colors. So they took advantage of the fact that if you put two different pixels next to each other, you'd get interference between the two, and it would create a third color and stuff like that. And it's too far in my background. I don't remember too many of the details about how that worked, but we got some pretty good stuff out of it, and it was a good project.
Cool. Yeah, the graphics and the screenshots I'm looking at are pretty darn cool. There's Word Flyer has these birds, and they're just beautiful, really nice, colorful, and very cool.
Yeah, the guys who designed the program, Ruben Zamora and Glenn Sherwood were the two guys who started the company, and they did. I'm pretty sure it was Ruben, but it might have been Glenn who did the artwork for that, and they were pretty talented guys. They had a whole lot of really interesting theories about game development. I forget exactly what the letters mean, but there was this thing we called SOI, which was a theory of how kids develop, and our goal was to create games that would educate educate not directly by directly teaching you by the standard way of doing computer education at that time, and in a lot of ways still is you ask people a bunch of questions and they have to answer it, and you go through this. It's sort of just like going to school,
drill and practice.
Yeah. And our goal was, especially with the younger kids, was to get them as soon as they had the ability to operate the computer. And we found that kids could once they hit about between 3 and 5, they finally that's when they first have enough brain stuff going on to figure out that what they do with the joystick matches what goes on the screen. And once they get that relationship, everything accelerates really fast, because once they realize that they are in control, then they take off. And I found that with my own kids. My own kids grew up on Marble Madness. My older son, he's 29 now, but he was born right around the time I started working on Marble Madness, so I got to see their development with those programs, immediately. And it's about 3 years old for my kids. They say 3 to 5 years old. So our goal with with Childware was that we were going to teach them all these different educational concepts, like Word Flyer. Like Word Flyer was teaching words and what they look like, but not by teaching them meanings, by teaching them, just giving them the visual thing, because at the age we were shooting for, they're really just sort of learning what words are anyway. They can talk, but reading is a whole nother thing. And so the first step to getting them to read is getting them to recognize words, understand letters, and all that stuff. And so that was the focus there. And that was sort of our philosophy of everything that we did. think one of the things that Ruben used to say was, or was it Ramon? It's not Ruben. It was Ramon. Ramon Zamora. I think I had the name wrong. Anyway, one of the things he used to say was he used to quote Marshall McLuhan saying, from the medium is the message, saying that anybody who thinks there is a distinction between education and entertainment doesn't know the first thing about either. And that's really true, because you don't learn anything unless you're really enjoying what you're doing. Kids don't learn in school because they're sitting there bored out of their minds, and they don't know what's going on. They don't care. And the teachers that work best are the ones that are able to engage them and show them how to bring life to whatever it is they're talking about. And if you have a history teacher that can bring life to history, then you're going to love history. If you got a history teacher that's teaching you, in 1620, the Pilgrims hit the land, they had Thanksgiving, and blah. Kids aren't going to relate to that, and it's not going to mean anything to them. And that's one of the reasons why I think kids have so much trouble with math, is because it's really hard to make math interesting. And I don't know, I never had that problem, but I can't say what it was that got me really excited about math when I was a kid. But most people never get that level of excitement. It's always something that's too scary and something they can't relate to. And so they never really discover how cool it really is. And I'm not doing education. I'm not a teacher or anything, but I think we could learn a lot from those types of efforts.
Excellent. I think this is my last question. If
Sure.
you could send a message to the kids who grew up using your programs and now they're grown-ups listening to this podcast, what would you tell them?
Wow, that's interesting. I consider myself very lucky to have gotten into this area, because I sort of stumbled across it at a time when it was just coming out, and the really cool thing that was going on, and I guess the if there's one piece of advice I'd give people, it would say, keep your eyes open for things for what's happening around you, because I stumbled into the video game thing, and it happened to be something that was there, and it was cool to do, and I got involved in it. But I could tell you, I could give you many, many stories of all the different things that I screwed up and messed up on. I could tell you about the time I spent sitting across my kitchen table from Steve Jobs while he's telling me about this great new computer he's going to build, and saying, I wish I could help you. And I could tell you about John Warnock, who started Adobe, while he was working at Xerox, and I worked with PostScript at Xerox and stuff. And I could tell you about the cell design system that I was talking about earlier when I worked on the Altos. I gave a paper on that at the 1981 Design Automation Conference, and I was standing there telling this room full of people about this great little tool for designing circuits, and everybody's coming up to me and saying, "Wow, this is really cool. We would like to get a hold of this product, and can we do that?" And I had to tell them, because it was true, I had to tell them that this is for internal development. Xerox has no interest in selling this as a product. Okay, well, the thing that I regret most is that no light went on my head. There should have been a light going on in my head saying, these people want what I'm doing, and my company isn't doing it. Why don't I go out and give it to them? And I can't tell you how many times I passed up on opportunities to do that. So if I have one piece of advice for folks growing up in this day and age, is that when you see an opportunity like that, don't be afraid to take it. Look for the things that people want that they can't get, and try and solve that need. I think that's how the Apple computer got built. That's how the design automation industry got built, which I worked on that in the early days, and then out of that came Cadence Design Systems. I started working for them later on in my career, and again, I got involved in video games because it was something that was fun to do, and people wanted it, and so that's my advice.
Awesome. Thank you, Larry.
Okay. Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you, and feel free to get in touch with me again if you have other questions or want to know about other things I've done.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Bye. If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.